Hi, I'm Victor Ndukauba. I'm an under 40 CEO.
The African Renaissance. The concept that the African people and nations shall overcome the current challenges confronting the continent and achieve cultural, scientific, and economic renewal is here, with young men and women taking the lead. Some call them the new school heroes. We call them under 40 CEOs.
A finance executive with experience in accounting, financial due diligence, and financial feasibility studies, as well as business plan development, Victor Ndukauba attended the University of Lagos, where he bagged his degree in metallurgical and materials engineering. He would later attend the IE Business School in Madrid, where he bagged his master's in business administration. Victor's interests also include early-stage startups as well as companies on the bubble. Victor is the Deputy Managing Director at Afrinvest West Africa.
All right, welcome to Under 40 CEOs, Victor.
Thank you, Fab.
All right, Victor, you attended the King's College, Lagos, and subsequently the University of Lagos, where you bagged your degree in metallurgical and materials engineering. Could you tell me about those series of events in your childhood that led you to studying sciences in the first place?
Thanks, Fab, and thanks for having me. Casey was more or less the default choice when I wrote the common entrance examinations back then. Incidentally, writing common entrance, we had to write several. I think I wrote about 8 or 9 of those. You know how it was with our parents back then. You do everything. You know, you write the federal common entrance, you write Lagos State, Navy,
military ones.
military.
Yes.
Anyways, we did everything. But I think I was fortunate. I had the best results in my primary school at the time, and the best result, I think, in my state as well. I was the overall best in Imo State. So Casey was a natural choice. So federal merit scholar, and without even applying for it, it just dropped. And so I showed up in Casey, essentially, just like that. Unilag itself was, of course, a more deliberate choice. But engineering was perhaps second nature, because I was always sort of pulled to understanding the environment. So taking in my environment, understanding trying to figure out how things work, what makes airplanes stay up in the air and not come down. You know, this big mass of items. Being good in math and all of the science courses we did in secondary school, it was sort of like a natural progression. But engineering also, you could say, was also influenced by my father, who is an engineer as well. So it just sort of was a default choice by itself, by virtue of all of those various factors.
Okay, so you eventually went and bagged a master's degree in business administration. That was from the IE Business School in Madrid in Spain. However, I'm aware that you also worked in a financial consulting firm early in your career. So how did you end up in finance?
Back when I was in Unilag, I sort of did the motions fairly early on. I wanted to do mechanical engineering. I didn't meet the cutoff for JAMB, but we walked into the school, met with the then Dean of Faculty of Engineering, Professor Ayo Ibidakpo, and I just said, look, sir, I would love to do this. I didn't meet the cutoff, and he asked me for my WAEC result. Looked and said, okay, you're a smart kid, you're the kind of people we want in here. You know what, I'm going to pen you down for admission on the metallurgy and materials. It used to be like a master's degree course, following on from mechanical, but it's now an undergraduate degree, and you know, we need to get students in there. So you're one of the bright ones, so we'll give you a slot. And that's how I got into Unilag. And then continued until my 3rd year. But I think the turning point for me happened in my year 4 when I went to intern at Shell. I wanted to be close to the action. So even though I had the chance to be in Lagos, I thought, look, why don't we go to the oil industry, the heart of it? So I went to Warri, and getting to Warri, I also opted to be part of the team that went into the field. So I was part of the production planning team that I moved to pipelines and then ultimately to production maintenance. So 2 months each cycle. While I was in Shell and in Warri, and in doing the work, I also sort of started trying to observe, understanding how the system in Shell was designed, you know, career progression, and what was required to lead a business. And then I remember paying attention to the then manager of the A team, which managed a couple of fields around Ughelli. And beyond being an engineer by training, I realized that he also understood about the business side of the oil industry. So he understood the technicals. How do you set up your instrumentation? How do you build out the equipment? How do you manage and maintain the integrity of the assets? But he also understood the economic side. So you're planning your production levels. He was also monitoring what was going on in international markets, production volumes, oil prices, and all the economics. So I thought to myself, okay, clearly it's not enough to be a techie and understand how things are designed and how processes work. You also need to understand the business side. So you could be a brilliant engineer, but financially you're not fulfilled. Which then brought me back to my own father, who, being an engineer, like I mentioned earlier, had however chosen to at some point leave and set up his own business. And I watched him build his own entrepreneurial business. Started by running an engineering consulting firm, and then went into everything from EPC, engineering, procurement, construction. In some way, you could say he's successful because ultimately the measure of a man's success is the quality of the kids and the legacies he's built. But I always felt that perhaps he could have done a bit more in terms of financial success. And I thought, well, he's just a quintessential engineer. There was no business, no finance training. So I thought maybe it would be helpful if I actually did a bit of finance first and then maybe detour back to engineering. And so when we graduated, I thought, okay, you know what, maybe the best place to start would be to go to consulting. So I applied to PwC. Fortunately, within 3 months of applying, got in, did interviews, passed, and I was admitted. So I finished NYSC in February, wrote the test in March, interviewed in April, resumed in May. Pretty quick. And of course, this is in an environment where people always say, look, there are no jobs, there are no opportunities. But again, sometimes you look back and realize there's only so much you can talk about, maybe academic brilliance or intelligence, but it all comes down really to you being hungry and wanting it. And I guess that showed, because I remember pounding the streets of Lagos, hopping on buses, having CVs in a flash drive, having it on a CD disc at a time, and just stopping by any office anywhere. So stop at KPMG, stop at PwC, went to Accenture, just went around everywhere. What I needed to do was go to banks. I didn't like the idea of a commercial bank, and I never applied to one.
Oh, wow.
I didn't think I was going to be able to learn, if you asked me. In retrospect, I don't regret the decision, but yeah.
All right, so tell me about your time at PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Yeah, PricewaterhouseCoopers was a pretty interesting adventure. I was there for about 3 years. The way the programs were designed then for graduate trainees was such that you were required to start off in audit. I didn't think I liked the idea of audit because it meant essentially that you were looking back, essentially, in the sense that, look, monies have been spent. Your job was to then go and establish whether the money was truly spent on what it was supposedly spent on. I thought, look, how am I looking back? Let me look forward. And I asked around, okay, what areas of this finance could you practice that allows you to be forward-looking? He said, well, if you're in corporate finance, then you're more forward-looking. So companies are looking to raise capital. So you help them with the plans for raising capital. I thought, okay, that's interesting. Maybe I want to do corporate finance. And I mentioned this to my recruiters during the interviews that I think this is what I would like to do. And I said it again in training. And fortunately, while we're still in training, a few of us were selected to then start off with corporate finance and transactions and consulting, which was rare at the time. Ultimately, that set me off. But I think the great thing about PwC though was, yes, the salaries weren't great, but again, they were benchmarked across all 143 countries globally at $10,000 starting. So whatever the local currency equivalent was meant that you weren't rich, but you were sort of comfortable. So you had just enough money not to worry about a lot of things your peers will worry about.
This is Under 40 CEOs.
Amazing. So in February of 2016, it was announced you had been appointed Deputy Managing Director at Afrinvest. Immediately after that appointment, what were those thoughts that kept you up at night?
That journey started slightly earlier. October of 2015, I was still in the middle of my executive MBA, and then one evening my CEO indicated that, look, was preparing a memo that he wanted to table to the board at the board meeting that October, and he was essentially considering making me the deputy. I said, look, think about it. I think you've been around the business. You started in corporate finance, in investment banking. You've led the research team. You've built it up. You've handled the asset management business, and you know enough about our trading business. So if there's anybody who has a thorough knowledge of everything that we do in all the areas, you are that one person. Some of the other people have done just one thing. They've done it excellently well, and they lead those businesses, but they don't have enough depth across the range of services to do that. So I went home and thought about it a couple of days, told my wife about it, and she's like, wow, that's a big one. I said, well, it is indeed, because what it means, again, in our industry that is highly regulated and where you're required to have a succession plan in place, meant that I was staring down the CEO role, which was even more scary because I thought about the country, Nigeria, and the profile of the firm that had sort of risen to such an enviable position in, and thought, look, am I able to sustain this? Am I able to carry on this legacy? Can I build this business and take it to the next level? And to be honest, there are several moments of self-doubt, a lot of them. But the thing again is, I've been fortunate to have built up, very solid relationships with some very trusted senior professionals. Spoke to my dad about it. My wife, of course, I've said that before, and I said, well, let's give it a try. It doesn't hurt. Another adventure.
And you're here now.
Here we are.
So that particular release about your appointment listed a couple of tasks. I think they're in threefold, and I'll attempt to just itemize them. 1, to improve the efficiency across the Afrinvest group. 2, providing strategic leadership. 3, driving new business development initiatives. How have you excelled at all of these tasks so far, and as your brief evolved over the past few years?
Yes, indeed. This happened in the middle of my MBA, which in itself was already extremely, excruciatingly demanding. I had thought because it was an online MBA that it wouldn't be as intense. In retrospect, it felt like a full-time MBA. Having to keep that with a job as demanding as what you just reeled out meant that something had to give. And at some point, I had to beg my wife and say, look, I may not be able to commit as much time to our kids, support and education. So where I used to be able to sit with them and walk through their homework, review their school workbook, and then help them explain stuff. Put them to bed, wake them up, give them a bath sometimes, allow her time off. When she wants to have a girl time with her friends, and then I'm home with the kids, I couldn't afford that anymore. And I said, look, this is a year and 3 months, so you're going to have to bear with me and just give me that support. In terms of the question as to performance, so 3 things. 1, then at the time we had spun off 2 divisions into 2 fully owned subsidiaries. Afrinvest Securities Limited, which was the broker-dealer company, where you essentially provided services to the market for those who wanted to buy and sell securities, whether they're stocks, as people call equities, or fixed income, so bonds and T-bills and the likes. And then the other business was our asset management business, which used to be a division within Afrinvest West Africa, but was also spun off into a fully fledged subsidiary, both of them wholly owned. And in doing that, it created obligations for us in terms of financial reporting. So we had to begin to prepare financial statements for those businesses independently, and then the consolidation needed to happen. But in doing that, we also needed to build a common platform for shared services. So we have one IT division, there's one HR function, and then all of the office services and support, the legal and compliance, even though we needed to replicate those for each of those businesses, again, because of regulation. So how do you build a structure that allows you to keep your costs and lean and efficient while ticking all the boxes for regulatory requirements and compliance? And then a firm that has always had history of being big on technology. Thankfully, with a background in engineering, I was also able to then think about, look, how do we become more efficient? To provide clients, unfettered 24/7 access to their accounts, We needed to then make investments, for example, that allowed us to go cloud. So migrating our systems, building a new ERP platform that allows us to report very quickly and to see how we're performing on a daily basis, and replacing older legacy systems that were a lot more expensive but less functional for us, just by virtue of the fact that we weren't quite suited for that. So those were the initial goals, and we managed to achieve those. All the audits were done, consolidation was done. At some point, we've got to think about some strategic moves that allow us to be better positioned to then better serve our clients. The last bit of it was beginning to build a culture of collaboration across the three businesses. So the core investment banking function, which is a consulting or advisory business where you're helping clients with raising money or becoming more efficient or spinning off inefficient businesses through divestitures or spin-offs, and the likes of that, or helping businesses that are looking to sponsor projects. And for me, that was a personal area of interest. So project finance. We need power in Nigeria. How do you get credible sponsors to build power plants and to fund the construction of those? So that's an area we've been active.
This is Under 40 CEOs.
The next level was to do with harnessing the synergies across our three businesses in terms of approaching the market for business. Whereas we used to be one firm under one roof with different licenses. Now you had three different businesses, and we had to find ways of taking those synergies to the market. So when I'm going to engage with the clients, as a corporate, to discuss their capital raising needs or to discuss their strategic goals as a franchise or as a brand or as a business, ultimately, whatever it is, every business is essentially reduced to two things. One is the human beings in the place. So there are people who run those businesses, from the executive C-suite level to the mid-management level to the junior staff. There is always a product or a service we can provide, from the group. So if I'm talking to the CEO, yes, he runs a business that needs perhaps to raise money to expand its operations, to grow its production lines, or to expand into new markets. What is the best way to do it? On balance sheet, corporate finance, or to spin off a subsidiary, or to sponsor a project where we can support in raising capital. So there's some opportunities for the investment bank to do business. However, because he's a CEO, there is also a need to bank him. He has investment needs. He's got assets that need to be managed. So you would expect that a C-level officer would have a bit of wealth that needs to be managed, or he has investment needs that need to be properly harnessed. What are his preferences? What are his living standards? What are his lifestyle preferences? And therefore, my asset management team can help structure around that an investment policy statement, helping managing his wealth and the obligations he may have as a result of his living standards. Same way, if he already is invested in the market, let's say he has a portfolio of equities or stocks, as they're popularly called, you can also then determine, look, what's the best way to support you? You need to take that portfolio off you because that is not your core area of business, and in which case we manage it for you through a discretionary account, but giving you remote access to view and control what happens. That happens on our securities trading platform using our online portal called the Afrinvest. So all of those were things we needed to sort of put together, and creating a strategy that made sure that even though we had three different businesses, the Afrinvest brand is able to communicate each of those essences, regardless of which channels we were going to market via.
All right, so Afrinvest is a group, basically, it's a group of companies.
So indeed.
Could you, make clearer, I know you said CEO of securities trading, is that what it is? And then you have other CEOs as well within the group. What's the business structure like?
So Afrinvest West Africa,
okay,
the parent company, originally was founded about 23 years ago as Securities Transactions and Trust Company, SecTrust. And then through a merger with Afrinvest Nigeria, created Afrinvest West Africa.
Okay.
Afrinvest West Africa, up until 2011, had all operating licenses issued in one company. So it was a a broker-dealer, meaning it had a license to operate the stock market as a broker. We had a portfolio manager license as well, which allowed us to offer asset management services. And then it has an issuing house license, the license that allows us to provide financial advisory services, M&A, and the likes to corporates, all in one entity. But having come out of the crisis of 2008 and 2009 and some of the challenges we encountered, we felt it was more efficient to restructure by carving out those two businesses. So the brokerage business, which we call the securities trading business, because you can also sell equities and you can sell bonds, or buy and sell on behalf of clients, we split it off into Afrinvest Securities Limited, ASL, and then the portfolio manager license we carved out into Afrinvest Asset Management Limited, both of which are wholly owned subsidiaries of Afrinvest West Africa. So Afrinvest West Africa is both an operating entity, because that is where the issuing house license sits, and that is the investment bank. But it owns those two subsidiaries, securities trading and asset management, both of which have MDs running them with complete boards and all the board committees, and then directors across each of the businesses sitting on the other hand to provide some bit of guidance and oversight.
This is Under 40 CEOs.
Victor supports the group's strategy and business development in his current capacity as the Deputy Managing Director of Afrinvest West Africa and provides senior oversight on the group's information technology as well as the finance, risk and control functions. In addition, he continues to play a leading role in origination and execution of investment banking transactions, drawing on his experience in corporate and project finance advisory as well as capital raising.
So I think I'm sitting with the right person to answer this question. So what are those critical, lessons that you've learned and can share on running a business to profitability and keeping it profitable?
I think the first things first is sort of recognizing the environment you're in. Living and working in Nigeria and doing business in Nigeria sometimes tests your faith and resolve. It is a pretty tough environment in which you do business. You have to consider several variables, and many times, regardless of how much you try to provide for the unknowns, sometimes take you by surprise. But I think for every business person, there are three layers of complexities you contend with. So you have the known knowns, which is essentially the issues you're aware of and you know what you need to do to address those issues. These include, obviously, your existing clientele, understanding your route to market, understanding your strategy and how you're going to operate, your key constraints as a business and how you intend to compete, to make a sense of the opportunities or the sector you choose to play in. You've got what I like to call the known unknowns. Again, these are factors that you have no control over, but ultimately you're aware that there are potential, banana peels in these areas. And of course, these are things that are external to your business. The political environment, for example, is something that is an unknown. You know about it though, because it's a risk. Each time there has to be change of government, whether at the federal or the state level, it has implications for your business, depending on what party or what individuals come to power, their outlook to life or their perception of business and risk and society, it helps to shape the policy direction of the country. So in many instances, you have a sense for what is, the risk, but you can't really dimension it because you have no control over it. One of such, again, is coming up in 2019 with the federal elections, National Assembly elections, or legislative elections. As a business, you have no control over that. It's predetermined by the Constitution. It happens every 4 years. You have no control over who emerges as president, but you've got to work out scenarios around what the possible outcomes are and how it will impact your business, and you begin to position yourself to survive. And then there's, of course, the last section, like I said, 3 areas. The last one being the unknown unknowns. Things that just happened that you didn't plan for, you had no preparation for, you didn't anticipate, but then they happen and you've got to respond. So I think from those three perspectives as a business, one of the things we've sort of learned to be is agile, meaning we are constantly scanning the environment, we are constantly reviewing the immediate past, what's happened the last 6 months, how do we envisage the next 6 months, What's the outlook for the next 12 to 18 months? What are the potential scenarios that could occur on the political scene, in the business scene, on the global stage, locally in our industry, internal to the business, what is our typical churn cycle? Are we likely to lose certain key people? If we are, what would be the impacts of losing this person or that person? Are we able to replace such, hands and very quickly get them to, get up to speed? But of course, in doing that, you've also got to look at your people. Ultimately, any business is as good as the quality of people it attracts.
This is Under 40 CEOs.